The maid's strange request the ship was quiet that evening. Only the low hum of the engines filled the long steel corridors. The human engineer, David, was inside the engine room, checking the systems like he always did. It was routine work. Nothing exciting, only wires, screens, and the smell of hot metal. He wiped his hands with a cloth and sighed, wondering if tonight would finally be calm. But calm never lasted long in deep space. The heavy doors of the engine room slid open with a hiss. David turned, expecting another crew member, maybe an officer with new orders. But what he saw froze him in place. The alien maid, Lyra, stood at the entrance. She wore nothing but a thin apron tied around her small frame, her face flushed with nervousness. David's eyes widened, and he nearly dropped his tools. "What are you doing here like that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lyra stepped inside, her eyes darting around the room as if she feared being seen. "I need your help," she whispered, clutching the apron tightly. David blinked, confused. "Help? In the engine room? Wearing only that?" he asked. Her cheeks darkened, but she nodded quickly. David felt the air grow heavy. Something was wrong. This was no joke. He could see her trembling hands, the way she struggled to speak. Finally, she moved closer, her voice low. "The engines. They are not safe. Something is wrong with them, but no one believes me." Her words carried fear, but also urgency. David frowned, stepping closer to the control panels. He had checked everything already. There were no alarms, no errors flashing. "On the screens, what do you mean? They look fine," he said. Lyra shook her head sharply. "No, not fine. They're heating inside. Beyond the normal level, it is hidden from the sensors." David stared at her. "How do you know that?" She hesitated, then placed her hand on the side of the main core. Her alien skin glowed faintly against the metal. "I can feel it," she said softly. "My people can sense heat shifts. It is part of our nature." David studied her for a moment. If she was telling the truth, then the ship could be in real danger. But why come here like this, in only an apron? As if reading his thoughts, Lyra looked away, embarrassed. "The officers laugh at me. They say I am only a maid, not an engineer, not important." Her voice cracked. "They ignore my warnings. So I came to you. I needed you to believe me. If I wore this uniform," she tugged at the apron, "maybe you would listen. Maybe you would not turn me away." David's chest tightened. This wasn't about seduction, it was desperation. Silence filled the engine room for a long moment. David could hear the steady hum of the core. Now he began to wonder if it sounded different. If maybe she was right. He reached out and pressed his hand against the core's surface. At first, it seemed normal, but after a few seconds, he felt it. A faint throb of heat pulsing like a heartbeat. His eyes narrowed. "You're right," he muttered. Almost to himself, Lyra's eyes widened. "You believe me?" she whispered. David nodded slowly. "Yes, something's wrong. But why isn't it on the sensors?" Lyra bit her lip. "Because someone doesn't want it to be. Someone hid it." Her words sent a chill down his spine. Sabotage. That was the only answer. But who would dare sabotage the ship's engines? And why trust this alien maid with such a secret? David looked at her closely. She was still trembling, clutching the apron like it was her only shield. He realized she had taken a great risk by coming here. If she was caught, she could be punished or even thrown off the ship. Yet she had chosen him, a human, to confide in. "All right," David said finally, his voice firm. "You did the right thing coming here. I'll help you. But you need to tell me everything you know." Lyra exhaled, relief flooding her face. She moved closer to him, almost too close, and whispered, "There is more, much more. But I cannot say it here, not loudly. The walls have ears." David's heart pounded. The danger was real, and now he was part of it. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A low alarm beeped on one of the smaller panels, almost too quiet to notice. David snapped his head toward the sound. It was the cooling system, struggling for just a second, then stabilizing again. He felt his stomach twist. If Lyra was right, the ship was sitting on a silent fire, waiting to erupt. He turned back to her. Stay close. Don't leave this room tonight. If you're right, then someone doesn't want us to know the truth. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. David grabbed his tools again, though now his hands felt heavy. This was no longer routine work. This was survival. And the maid's strange request was only the beginning. Hidden malfunction. David stared at the faint beeping light on the panel, his mind racing. He had worked with starship engines for years, and he knew the sound of trouble when he heard it. It wasn't a loud alarm, no flashing red lights, just a quiet warning hidden in the background. The kind of warning only someone paying close attention would notice. It was almost as if the system wanted to hide its own pain. Lyra stood beside him, her apron pulled tight as she leaned closer. You feel it too, don't you? She whispered, her voice trembling. David nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the screen. Yes, something's wrong, something deeper than what the monitors show. Lyra lowered her gaze. They all ignored me, but I knew it. My skin burns when I come near the core. It is not normal. David crouched down near the main access panel. He opened the cover and let the warm air escape into the room. The wave of heat hit his face, stronger than before. This was not routine. The cooling system was failing, but the sensors still read stable. Someone had tampered with the readings. Masking the danger, he looked back at Lyra, his voice sharp. Who else knows about this? Her lips trembled. No one. I tried telling the chief engineer, but he laughed. Said I was imagining things. Said I should stay in the kitchens where I belong. David clenched his fists, anger flashing in his eyes. How many times had good warnings been ignored because of arrogance? And yet, here was this maid, seeing what others refused to believe. Then it's just us, David muttered. He pulled out a scanner, running it along the pipes that carried coolant around the engine. The screen flickered, static lines covering the display. Sabotage, without a doubt. Someone had scrambled the readings to hide the overheating, and if the engine reached critical levels, the entire ship would burn in silence before the alarm ever screamed. Lyra shifted nervously, her glowing skin giving off a faint light in the dim room. Can we stop it? She asked, her tone filled with hope and fear together. David exhaled slowly. Yes, but not without risk. We'll need to shut down the flow and restart it manually. But that could overload the system if we're not careful. She swallowed hard. I will help you. Whatever it takes. David blinked at her. You're not trained for this. Lyra shook her head fiercely. No, but my people can sense heat better than machines. I can feel where the danger is strongest. I can guide you. Her determination caught him off guard. This wasn't just fear anymore, this was courage. He nodded. All right, but we'll need to be quick. Before someone notices what we're doing. As they worked together, David noticed how precise Lyra was. Every time she touched the pipes or the panels, she would whisper, Here, this one is hotter. Don't trust that gauge. The heat flows stronger there. And each time she was right. It was as if she was born to feel the heartbeat of machines. David had to admit she was more valuable than half the officers on this ship, but a nagging thought clawed at his mind. If someone sabotaged the system, then they could be watching right now. He glanced up at the ceiling, at the tiny black eyes of the security cameras. Were they alone, or was someone recording every move? The thought made his skin crawl. He leaned close to Lyra and whispered, Don't look around, but we're being watched. Keep your head down and act natural. Lyra froze for a second, then nodded. Her trembling stopped, and her face hardened with resolve. She bent lower over the pipes, pretending to wipe them clean like a maid would to anyone watching. It looked like she was only polishing metal. But David knew she was guiding his hands toward the hottest areas. Minutes passed in tense silence. Only the hum of the engines and the clink of tools filling the air. Finally, David pulled out a piece of charred wiring, half melted and hidden behind a panel. He held it up for her to see. This isn't wear and tear. This was placed here to fail, slow and silent. Lyra's eyes widened. Sabotage. She breathed. David nodded grimly. And if we hadn't checked, the ship would be gone in days. Maybe hours. They both fell silent, the weight of the truth pressing down on them. Lyra's voice was soft when she spoke. They will not believe us. Even with proof, they will say, I am lying again. David clenched his jaw. Then I'll be the one to speak. They might ignore you, but they can't ignore me. She looked at him with wide eyes. You would risk yourself. For me? He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. For the crew, for the ship, and yes, for you, because you were brave enough to speak when no one else would. For the first time that night, Lyra smiled faintly. Though her eyes still glistened with worry, she whispered, Then I will stay by your side. Until this danger is gone. Suddenly the floor beneath them trembled. The lights flickered once more. Stronger this time, David and Lyra exchanged a sharp glance. The problem was growing worse, faster than expected. They didn't have days, maybe not even hours. David grabbed his tools and shouted, Come on, we need to move now, before it's too late. And as they rushed deeper into the engine's heart, the shadows around them seemed to whisper. Somewhere on that ship, someone wanted them to fail. And they were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Danger in the shadows, the engine. Room was darker than before. The lights flickered every few minutes. David worked quickly with his tools, sweat forming on his forehead. Beside him, Lyra stayed close, her glowing skin giving off a faint light. Almost like a lantern in the gloom. It should have felt safe with her there. But David's chest was heavy with unease. Something about the silence felt wrong. Lyra placed her hand against the pipes again. Closing her eyes, her skin shimmered. As she whispered, the heat is climbing faster. Someone must be forcing it from another control point. David froze, his mind racing. That meant the sabotage wasn't finished, was still happening right now, which meant one thing. The saboteur was still on board and active. He looked toward the far corner of the room where the shadows stretched. Deep, the sound of the engine's hum covered everything. But David thought he heard something else, a faint scrape, like metal against metal. He tightened his grip on his wrench and whispered, Stay behind me. Don't make a sound. Lyra's eyes widened, but she obeyed, clutching the apron around herself tightly. Slowly, David walked toward the dark corner. Every step echoed against the steel floor. The shadows seemed alive, shifting, waiting. He stopped suddenly. The sound was gone. Nothing but the hum of the ship remained. Was his mind playing tricks, or had someone been there, watching? He turned back to Lyra. Her face was pale, her glowing skin dimming with fear. I felt it, she whispered, eyes watching us. David's heart pounded. If she felt it too, then it wasn't just his imagination. Listen, David said firmly. From now on, no one can know what we're doing, not until we're sure. Not until we have proof, Lyra nodded. Quickly, her lips trembling. But what if they come for us? What if they try to stop us? David looked back at the shadows, his jaw tight. Then we fight. They returned to the main console. David began rerouting power manually. Bypassing the fake readings, the panel sparked, smoke rising as he forced it open. Lyra gasped, stepping back, careful. She cried, but David shook his head. This is the only way, if we don't cut off their control. The engines will burn out from the inside. The heat in the room grew stronger. Sweat rolled down David's face, and even Lyra's skin glowed brighter, reacting to the rising temperature. "It's getting worse," she whispered, her voice trembling. David cursed under his breath. The saboteur must have noticed their interference and was trying to push the engine harder. A battle was unfolding, one in shadows, one in circuits. Suddenly, a panel on the wall sparked violently. The lights went out completely for a moment, plunging the room into darkness. In that black silence, David heard it clearly. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving just outside the engine room. He tensed, his eyes straining in the dark. The lights flickered back on, dim but enough to see the doorway. It was empty, no one there. Lyra's hands shook as she clutched his arm. "They're close." "Too close," she whispered. David placed a steadying hand on hers. "Stay calm. That's what they want, to scare us, but we won't give them the chance." Still, the fear gnawed at him. Whoever was doing this wasn't just skilled in sabotage. They were bold enough to watch, to stalk. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was a game, a deadly one. David worked faster, sparks flying from the wires. "Hold this steady," he said, passing a tool to Lyra. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. Steadying the pipe as the heat pulsed beneath her fingers, she whispered, "Hot. So hot. If this bursts, we'll both die." David gritted his teeth. "Then we won't let it burst." The minutes dragged like hours, every sound, every flicker of light made them jump. Then came another noise. This time, the hiss of a vent opening above them. David's head snapped upward. Something small and metallic dropped from the vent, hitting the floor with a sharp clang. Smoke began to rise where it landed. A charge, a small incendiary device designed to trigger a fire. "Run!" David shouted, grabbing Lyra by the arm. They ducked behind the thick base of the engine just as the device erupted. Flames licked across the floor, smoke filling the air. The sprinklers activated, dousing the fire in seconds, but David's blood ran cold. That device wasn't old or random, it had been planted seconds ago, which meant someone had been in the vents above them, watching, waiting. Lyra coughed, clutching his arm tightly. "They want us dead," she whispered, her voice breaking. David looked around the smoky room, his grip tightening on his wrench. "No, they want the ship dead, but we're in their way. That's why they're coming for us." The sprinklers hissed to a stop, leaving the air damp and heavy. David stood slowly, scanning the ceiling vents, the shadows, the corners of the room. His voice was low but firm. "Whoever you are, you won't win." But even as he said it, he knew the fight had only just begun. Lyra moved closer, her eyes wide with fear but shining with determination. "David, they'll come again, won't they?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. And next time, they won't hide in the shadows." The engine hummed louder, as if mocking their struggle. Somewhere beyond the steel walls, the saboteur waited, watching, planning, ready to strike again. And David realized one terrible truth. The danger wasn't just the failing engine anymore. The real danger was the enemy moving in the dark, closer with every passing second. Trust and tension. The engine room smelled of smoke and wet steel. The sprinklers had stopped, but the floor was still damp. David wiped water from his face, his heart still pounding from the small explosion. Lyra stood beside him, clutching her apron, her glowing skin trembling faintly in the dim light. She looked both terrified and determined, a strange mix that caught David's attention. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the silence heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Finally, David broke it, his voice sharp but steady. "Someone is playing a dangerous game, and they won't stop until either we're dead or this ship burns." Lyra nodded, her eyes wide. "They know we are searching. They will not let us continue without a fight." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. We can't trust anyone now. Not the officers, not the engineers, not even the captain. Her lips parted in shock. Not even the captain. She asked softly. David shook his head. Until we know who's behind this. No one is safe to trust. Lyra lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the edge of her apron. Then, it is only you and me. David glanced at her, noticing how vulnerable she looked. Yet how brave she stood. Yes, he said firmly. Only you and me. For a long moment, their eyes locked. An unspoken agreement passing between them. It wasn't just survival now, was trust, fragile but real. They returned to the panels. Working in silence, David handed her tools while she guided him with her strange ability to sense heat. At times their hands brushed against each other, sending a spark of awkwardness through the tension. Neither of them spoke about it, but the air between them grew heavier with every passing second. Finally, Lyra broke the silence, her voice soft, almost fragile. Why do you believe me, David, when no one else would? He paused, lowering the tool in his hand. Because you were right. Because you risked everything to warn me. Because you're braver than the people who should be protecting this ship. Her cheeks glowed brighter, not just from her alien skin, but from something deeper. No one has ever said that to me, she whispered. Not even my own people. David frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, then spoke, her words heavy. My kind. We are divided. The servants, the workers, we are not seen as equals. They treat us as if we are nothing. Just tools for cleaning, cooking, carrying. Her voice shook when I said, the engines were wrong. They laughed. They told me to scrub floors instead of worrying about machines. David clenched his jaw, anger boiling inside him. They're fools, he said, and if they can't see your value, then that's their loss. Her eyes widened at his words, her lips parting slightly. For a moment, she looked at him, not with fear, but with something else, something softer. She whispered, thank you. But the fragile moment didn't last long. The floor beneath them rumbled, the engine humming. Louder than before, the heat pulsed like a heartbeat inside the walls. David cursed under his breath. They're pushing it harder again. We need to act fast. They moved together, working in perfect rhythm now. David unscrewed panels while Lyra pressed her glowing hands against the pipes. Guiding him. Here, this one, she whispered. The heat flows strongest. Here, he nodded, pulling out charred wires and replacing them with spares. Every movement was quick, desperate. The tension between them grew not just from danger, but from the closeness of their bodies as they worked side by side. At one point, the ship jolted, throwing Lyra forward. She fell against David. Her hands pressed against his chest. Their faces were only inches apart, their breath mingling in. The hot air for a second time seemed to stop. David swallowed hard, his heart racing. Lyra's eyes searched his, wide and uncertain. But then she pulled back quickly, her cheeks glowing even brighter. I am sorry, she stammered. David shook his head, forcing a small smile. Don't be, just stay close. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, filled with something unspoken. Trust had been forged. But along with it came a strange tension neither could ignore. Every glance, every touch of hands felt charged, like the engine itself, humming with energy. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from the corridor outside. Both of them froze, eyes snapping toward the door. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, growing. Closer, David motioned for Lyra to stay quiet. He grabbed his wrench, holding it tightly. Ready to strike if needed, the footsteps stopped just outside the door. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, a shadow moved across the small window. On the door, someone was standing there, watching them. David's grip tightened on the wrench, his pulse quickening. But just as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow was gone. The footsteps fading into the distance, Lyra let out a shaky breath. "They are toying with us," she whispered. "They want us afraid." David nodded grimly. "Then we'll give them. Nothing, fear is their weapon, but it won't break us, still." His heart hammered in his chest. He knew she was right. They were being toyed with, stalked like prey in a cage, but he also knew something else. The bond between him and Lyra was growing stronger with every second of danger, and that bond might be the only thing keeping them alive. The engines roared again, louder, angrier. David and Lyra exchanged a look. No words were needed now. They were in this together, against shadows, against sabotage, against death itself. And though fear pressed against them like the heat of the core, trust and the tension it carried was the flame that refused to die. The saboteur strikes the engine room shook with another deep rumble, the metal walls groaning under pressure. David tightened the last bolt on the panel, his hands moving fast. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but his focus didn't waver beside him. Lyra pressed her glowing hand against the pipes, whispering, "The heat is not stopping. It is climbing again." Her voice was trembling, but there was steel in her words. David muttered under his breath, "Whoever is doing this is pushing harder. They know we're close to stopping them." He stood quickly, scanning the consoles. The readings were all false, masked by corrupted signals. But the real danger burned in the pipes if they didn't act fast. The core would overheat beyond saving. Suddenly, the doors to the engine room hissed open. David spun around, wrench in hand. Lyra gasped. T, clutching his arm tightly, a figure stepped inside, tall and confident, the glint of authority in his uniform. It was Officer Karnak, one of the senior engineers of the ship. David frowned, his grip tightening. "Karnak?" he asked sharply. The officer smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was cold, sharp, and cruel. "Well, well," Karnak said slowly, his voice calm. "I was wondering who kept interfering with my work." Lyra's breath caught, her eyes wide. With horror, "You?" she whispered. "You're the one." Karnak chuckled, his eyes narrowing at her. "Yes, little maid, it was me. But who would ever believe you?" His words dripped with venom. David's jaw clenched, fury burning inside him. "You tried to kill us all. You would have destroyed this ship." Karnak shrugged, as if it was nothing. Sometimes ships must burn for real change to happen. Sacrifices must be made. David took a step forward, his wrench raised. "You won't touch this engine again." Karnak's smirk deepened, and he pulled a small device from his belt. It glowed red, pulsing with dangerous energy. "Ah, but I already have," he said. Pressing a button, the engine roared louder, the pipes shuddering violently, steam hissing into the room. Lyra cried out, clutching her apron as the heat surged. David cursed, glancing at the core. Karnak had triggered a forced overload. The engine was now on a countdown to destruction. David lunged forward, swinging his wrench. Karnak blocked with his arm. The two men clashing in the middle of the room. Metal clanged against flesh. Grunts filling the air as they struggled. Lyra screamed, "Stop him, David. If he reaches the panel, he will finish it." David pushed harder, forcing Karnak back. The officer was strong, but David's rage gave him power. Still, Karnak fought like a man who had prepared for this moment. He slammed his fist into David's ribs, forcing him to stumble back. Pain shot through David's chest. But he didn't fall. He swung again, his wrench smashing against Karnak's shoulder. The officer snarled in pain, dropping the device. It clattered across the floor, sliding toward the edge of the engine platform. Lyra rushed forward, diving on her knees, grabbing it before it could fall. Her hands trembled as she held the device, the red glow reflecting in her eyes. "Smash it." David shouted, but Karnak's eyes turned dark and furious. "Don't you dare!" He roared, lunging toward her. Lyra screamed, clutching the device close to her chest. At the last second, David intercepted Karnak, tackling him to the ground. The two men rolled across the floor, fists flying. The clang of steel echoing in the room. Lyra scrambled back, her breath fast and shaky. The device hummed in her hands. Growing hotter, she could feel it pulsing like a heart. "It is connected. If I break it, the overload might trigger faster," she whispered to herself. Her eyes darted to David, still struggling against Karnak. She had to make a choice. Karnak twisted. Slamming David against the floor, his hand reached for Lyra. His voice a snarl. "Give it to me, worthless girl." But David grabbed him, pulling him back with all his strength. "Run, Lyra." He shouted, but Lyra didn't run. Her legs shook, but she stood firm. "No," she whispered. Not this time. She raised the device high and smashed it against the steel floor. The red glow shattered in a burst of sparks. A shockwave rippled through the room, the engine groaning in protest. Karnak's eyes widened in rage and panic. "You fool. You don't know what you've done." David shoved him back, gasping for breath. "She knows enough to stop you." For a moment, everything went silent. Then the engine's hum lowered, stabilizing slightly. The heat levels began to drop. The pipes no longer shaking violently. The sabotage had been cut off, at least for now. Lyra collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. David rushed to her side. Pulling her up, "You did it," he whispered. "You stopped it." But Karnak wasn't finished. He staggered to his feet, his eyes wild. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You can't protect her forever, human, and you can't save this ship." He turned and bolted toward the exit, disappearing into the corridor. David started after him, but Lyra grabbed his arm weakly. "No, don't. He will kill you. We must save the engine first." David hesitated, his chest heaving, then nodded. She was right. Without the engine, none of them would survive. He held her close for a moment, whispering, "We'll stop him. But first, we stop the fire inside this ship." The shadow swallowed Karnak as he escaped. But David knew this was only the first strike. The saboteur had revealed himself, and now the true battle was about to begin. The final repair engine room was still trembling after Karnak escaped. Smoke lingered in the air and the lights flickered weakly. David stood with Lyra at his side, both breathing hard, both shaken but alive. The broken remains of the red device sparked on the floor, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. David pressed a hand to his ribs where Karnak had struck him. The pain sharp, but he ignored it. The ship was still in danger. Lyra placed her glowing hand on the pipes again, closing her eyes. Her face grew pale as she whispered, "The heat is lower. But the damage is deep. The flow is blocked inside. The coolant is trapped." David cursed under his breath. That means the sabotage already spread. The whole system is choking. He looked at her, his jaw tightening. "There's only one way left. We have to repair it from inside the crawl tunnels." Lyra's eyes widened, fear flashing in them. "The tunnels? They are filled with steam, too hot for anyone to survive." David shook his head. "Not for you, you can sense the heat. You can guide us through." She swallowed hard, her glowing skin flickering faintly. "You mean me, inside those tunnels?" David crouched, meeting her eyes, his voice steady. "I'll be right behind you. I won't let anything happen to you. But you're the only one who can sense where it's safe. If we don't fix it, the core will overload again, and this time nothing will stop it." For a moment, Lyra looked ready to refuse. Her body trembled, her hands clutching the apron tight. But then she lifted her chin, courage flickering in her eyes. "Then I will go, but you must stay close. I don't want to face it alone." David smiled faintly. Despite the danger, You won't be alone, not as long as I'm here. Together. They pulled open the heavy hatch to the crawl tunnels. A wave of steam rushed out, hitting them like fire. David coughed, his skin already burning. But Lyra stepped forward, her body glowing brighter as she pressed her hand against the edge. I can feel the path, she whispered. Follow me. The tunnels were narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through. The heat pressed in from every side, making David's head spin, but Lyra moved with purpose. Touching the pipes, guiding them left, then right, avoiding the hottest areas, her skin shimmered with light. Illuminating the darkness ahead, she whispered, constantly. Here, cooler, step here. No, not that way. Too hot. David followed every word, trusting her completely, halfway through. The ship jolted violently. A loud groan echoed through the metal walls. David braced himself, holding the side of the tunnel. What was that? He shouted over the noise. Lyra's face twisted with fear. They're forcing the overload again. Karnak must be at another station. David cursed. Then we don't have much time. They crawled deeper, the air growing heavier. David's body screamed with heat, sweat pouring down his back. Every breath burned his throat. But Lyra's glowing hand guided him forward, her courage pulling him along. Finally, they reached the blockage, a cluster of melted pipes and twisted metal, steam blasting through small cracks. The coolant was trapped, the flow completely stopped. David pulled out his tools, his hands shaking from exhaustion. This is it. If we clear this, the system can breathe again. But as he tried to cut through the damaged pipe, the heat grew worse. The metal hissed and burned his gloves. He winced in pain, almost dropping his tool. Lyra's hand touched his shoulder, her voice firm. I can withstand more than you. David shook his head. It's too dangerous. One wrong move and the steam will tear through you. But Lyra only smiled faintly. You forget, lived my whole life, ignored. Seen as nothing, this is my chance to be more than a maid. Her words hit him like a blade. He stared at her glowing eyes, seeing the fire within. And slowly, he nodded, handing her the tool. Lyra pressed her hands against the hot pipe. Guiding the tool with steady precision, steam hissed around her, burning her skin. But she didn't flinch. Her glow grew brighter. Her face twisted in pain, but also determination. David wanted to pull her back, to shield her. But he forced himself to trust her. Minute by minute, she carved through the blockage, her breath heavy. Finally, with a loud crack, the twisted pipe gave way. Coolant surged through. The flow restored. The heat in the tunnel dropped almost instantly. Lyra collapsed back into David's arms, trembling, her skin dimming. You did it, David whispered, holding her close. You saved us. She smiled weakly, her voice barely a whisper. No. We saved each other. David carried her carefully through the tunnel, back toward the hatch. The air was cooler now. The engine hummed steady once again as they emerged. The lights in the engine room stabilized, the panels showing green. The ship had been saved, at least for the moment. David lowered Lyra gently onto a chair, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. You're more than what they think you are, he said softly. You're the reason we're alive. Her eyes glistened with tears. No one has ever said that to me. Until you. Their hands touched, lingering for a heartbeat longer than needed. In that quiet moment, trust had turned into something deeper, something neither of them dared to name yet. But the peace didn't last. The intercom crackled overhead, Karnak's voice echoing through the speakers. You think you've won, but this ship is still mine to destroy. David's eyes hardened, his jaw tight. He looked at Lyra, then at the glowing panels of the engine. The final battle wasn't over. The saboteur would strike again, and next time it would be deadlier. New beginning. The engine room glowed with steady light again. The dangerous heat was gone, and the hum of the core was calm. David leaned against the console, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Beside him, Lyra sat weakly on the chair, her glowing skin dim but alive. She looked fragile, but her eyes carried strength. The kind of strength that came only after facing death. For a moment, the two of them just breathed, letting the silence wrap around them. But then the intercom crackled once more, Karnak's voice slithering through the air. "You delay the inevitable, human Maid. You think you've saved this ship. But all you've done is buy time." David's fists clenched, fury burning in his chest. He shouted back, though he knew Karnak could not hear, "You're finished. You won't touch this engine again." Lyra flinched at the sound of Karnak's laughter echoing through the speakers. It was cold, filled with hatred. "I will finish what I started. And when the fire comes, you will regret crossing me." The intercom cut, leaving behind silence. David looked at Lyra, his jaw tight. "He won't stop. Not until one of us ends this." Lyra nodded slowly, fear flickering in her eyes. "He will come back, and he will come for us first." David took her hand gently. "Then we'll be ready." Hours passed in uneasy quiet. David repaired what he could, restoring systems, while Lyra guided him. With her strange heat sense, they spoke little. But the bond between them grew stronger with every glance, every shared silence. David had begun to see her not as a maid, not as a servant, but as someone who carried courage greater than most. Officers on this ship, and Lyra, though shy, began to see David as more than just a human engineer. He was the one who believed her when no one else did. Suddenly, the engine room doors hissed open. David spun, wrench ready. Karnak stepped inside, his uniform torn, his eyes blazing with madness. "You should have stayed out of this, human," he snarled. "But now you'll burn with her." Lyra gasped, pressing closer to David. Karnak held another device, smaller but deadlier, its glow unstable. David knew at once what it was: a fail-safe bomb, enough to rip apart the core in seconds. "Don't!" David shouted. Stepping forward, Karnak sneered. "You can't stop me, not this time." He raised the device, his finger hovering over the trigger. But before he could press it, Lyra stepped forward, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "No," she said firmly, her voice trembling but strong. "You will not destroy what I saved." Karnak laughed cruelly. "You? A maid? You're nothing." But David's voice cut like steel. "She's more than you'll ever be." And with those words, he lunged. The fight was brutal. Karnak swung with rage, his fists heavy. But David blocked with his wrench, striking back. Metal clashed against flesh, grunts and growls echoing through the room. Karnak slammed David against the console, sparks flying. David gasped but pushed back, his rage giving him strength. The device clattered to the floor. Sliding across to where Lyra stood, her eyes widened as she bent to pick it up. The glow was unstable, pulsing violently. She realized it was seconds from detonating. "David," she cried, "it's about to blow." David's eyes snapped to her, fear flashing. "Throw it into the coolant tank, now." Without hesitation, Lyra sprinted to the side of the core. The heat burned against her skin, but she didn't stop. She hurled the device into the tank. There was a blinding flash. Then a muffled boom. Steam erupted, but the tank held, swallowing. The blast, the engine trembled but stayed intact. Karnak froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. No, that's impossible." David used the moment, slamming his wrench into Karnak's chest. The officer staggered, choking, before collapsing to the floor. Unconscious, David stood over him, chest heaving. "It's over," he muttered. Lyra stumbled toward him, her skin dimming from exhaustion. "You did it," she whispered. David shook his head, pulling her gently into his arms. No, we did it. Together, she leaned into him. Her trembling body pressed against his. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Later, when the captain and crew arrived, they found the engine room stabilized. Karnak was dragged away in chains, his betrayal finally revealed, but none of them looked at Lyra with respect until David spoke. "This ship is alive because of her," he said firmly. "She saw what no one else would. She risked everything when all of you ignored her." The crew was silent, shame flickering in their eyes. Lyra lowered her head, unused to such words, but David lifted her chin gently, his voice soft. "From now on, you're not just a major part of this crew." Her eyes glistened with tears, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Thank you. No one has ever said that to me." David smiled, squeezing her hand. "Get used to it, because this is only the beginning," as the ship sailed once more through the endless stars. The hum of the engine was calm, steady, alive, and deep inside that steel heart, two souls who had been strangers now stood together, bound by trust, by survival, and by something even stronger. A new beginning had been forged in fire and shadows, and neither David nor Lyra would ever walk alone again.